Good day, friends. Welcome to Our Power is Within. I'm your host, Chasmith, aka Just Chaz, and I am on a mission to inspire people to take their power back and help people to realize that each and every one of us has a healer within our own self. When we can create an environment that supports healing and get out of our own way, we are truly capable of healing in mind, body, and soul. Whether you have been following along this whole time or if this is your first episode, thanks for being on this journey with me, and I appreciate you. If you do feel called to help me spread this message of empowerment, healing, and possibility, please consider taking a moment to leave a quick review on Apple Podcast or a 5-star rating if and only if I've earned it, or of course share your favorite episode on social media or with a friend. Last week was week 2 of the 5-week self-love language challenge. Our focus was acts of service, and I would love to hear how this went for you, so shoot me a message. This is week 3, and our focus is gifts. Many moons ago, when I first heard about the love languages and I took the test, I actually scored 0 on the gifts. But the more I rewired and I got in tune with myself, as well as came to understand the meaning behind gifts, the more I connected with it on some level. See, initially I was just thinking about lavish gifts and material things and so forth, and while that might be for some, I believe it doesn't have to be that. It can be about those special gifts that say, I hear you, I see you, I know you, or I thought of you when I saw this, and so on. Do you get what I'm saying? So when I think about gifts as an act of self-love, I think about the things that I would normally never spend my money on because of some limiting belief about financial abundance, or maybe a limiting belief about my worthiness. This is definitely an area of my life I've been working on more recently. In my past, I would rarely have bought myself anything because I would deem nearly everything as a waste of money. But through rewiring and being honest with myself, what I've come to realize is I was mostly saying that I wasn't worth the money it would cost. I started to notice how easy it was for me to buy something for someone else, but not myself. And this needed to be explored. So, what is something that you dream about or could really use or enjoy, or that would make your life more simple that you haven't given yourself? Maybe because you haven't felt worthy of it. Maybe it's a massage where you can fall into the massage table of just pure, deep relaxation. Or maybe the gift that you need for yourself isn't about money at all. Maybe it's the gift of time, a pause, presence. Maybe it's the gift of embodying joy. I hope you will explore this week into the world of gifts as an act of self-love and show yourself how worthy you really are. So this week's episode is fun. We have our guest, Gaeta, with us today to talk all about internal family systems, otherwise known as IFS. Have you ever heard of it? If not, no worries, you're in the right place, because I've only started to just now learn about this. I have had some previous guests actually talk about parts work, but Ari does a fantastic job of really diving in deep and pulling it all together for us to understand. She shares with us how it was developed, how it can help us in our healing journey, and so much more. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. All right, Ari, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here with me and everyone listening today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Awesome. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go quickly into letting you take the floor, because I do know that you have a lot of really great things to talk about today with us. So I don't want to waste any time, and I just want to let you get into your story. Just give us like a background on who you are and what you've kind of been through and what led you to where you are today.
Okay. So just to model a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about, right now I have a part that's saying, what do I have to talk about on this podcast, right? So I really want to talk about a type of therapy that I do called internal family systems. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, I guess, as far as titles go, though I've strayed a little bit from the traditional therapy titles. I got into, let me start over. I basically have had limbic system impairment my whole life. I would say probably from an infant. Um, and I had a very dysfunctional childhood, like some people who do this kind of brain retraining have had. Things were very unpredictable in my environment. I didn't have a lot of adults I could trust. And when I was 21, I woke up, literally one day I woke up and I was in excruciating pelvic pain, which has become more well known now, people talking about different pelvic floor disorders and things like that. At the time, there was nothing. I think there was one Sex and the City episode where one of the characters had an issue like this and made a joke about it. And that was about it. I couldn't find any information, but I had a pelvic floor pain and I didn't know what it was. So I spent years and years and years trying to figure it out. I mean, this was, now it's been, I would say it was probably 10 to 15 years of solid searching, researching, doctors, the whole thing. And, many people have sort of their one big it that leads them into the wellness field and researching and trying to figure out. And this was mine. And so I was given, tons of different diagnoses, misinformation, the whole thing. And I had no idea that it was limbic impairment or anything to do with my nervous system. I had zero idea. I thought it had to do with laundry detergent and drinking wine. Like for a long time, I really didn't know. And so throughout this process, I'm over here like trying to figure it out. Every day, every minute is spent in this. And now I'm getting interested in psychology. I'm getting interested in helping people. I'm getting interested in bodies. And so I decided to go to social work school in order to become a therapist. So I did that. I'm still struggling with my own stuff. And after I graduated, I did some program in somatic experiencing, which is a body-based therapy. I'm sure a lot of people know like somatic therapies. And that was about 3 years long. And I started to become more aware at that time what was going on, because somatic experiencing really focuses on fight, flight, freeze mechanisms in the body. And I was like, oh, wow, like when I'm feeling this way, my symptoms are worse. And when I'm feeling more relaxed, my symptoms are better. Or if I go on vacation, my symptoms go away. Like all of a sudden it started to become clear that there was some mechanism inside that was controlling this, and it wasn't from an external force. So I really got into somatic work. I started using somatic work with clients, which was huge. And it like opened up my understanding of so much. I mean, my world just changed. And there was a moment when I first started the training where one of the teachers taught us something called orienting, which is just simply just looking around your environment, sort of moving your head, looking around the room that you're in, looking around wherever you are. And it sounds so simple, but when we're stuck in a trauma response, we're sort of in a narrow position. We tend to not orient to our surroundings, literally. So I started doing this. It's the simplest thing. I'd be in the car and I'd look around, and it was as if I had never seen the world before. It was so strange. Like I was like, wow, like I've been missing so much because I was so tunnel vision and stuck in like a fight flight paradigm, really. Like my world looked narrow. And so that was really the beginning of like literally looking around, and things started to develop from there. And then I started my private practice, and I started using somatic work with people. And then eventually, just to bring it to the current day as far as what I want to talk about, eventually I got trained in something called internal family systems, which is a type of therapy that works with what we call parts. And we can all kind of relate to this, right? It's like, oh, you have one part of you that, likes ice cream, and you have another part of you that doesn't like ice cream, or whatever it is. We all talk in this way all the time. And when I brought in the parts work, that's when my personal life started to really shift, my spirituality started to shift, and my practice with clients really started to take off in a new way, because I had this sort of multidimensional way to understand myself and to understand my brain, to understand my clients' selves, and to really become more conscious. So yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit more about IFS and I think it would be really helpful for people doing brain retraining and people not doing brain retraining.
Yes, yes, and yes. Awesome. I do want to talk about internal family systems for sure. That's why I got you on the show. It's something that I think's been, it's been briefly discussed by a few other guests, but definitely not under this title, under the term internal family systems. But it has been discussed in some levels. I think there was even one episode where I was sharing with someone that I learned a fun trick where you actually name your parts, and I gave them all one day. Like, I made a journal entry where I gave them all really funny names, like
right.
Negative, the negative Nancy, or complaining Bob, or like even there's guy names, girl names, whatever just sounded funny,
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into that, though, I was curious. Somatics is another term that comes up a lot in dialogue on some of the episodes. And I know you gave the Orient an example, but do you have any other quick examples you could give of how one could integrate somatic experiences into their journey?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of the way I have been trained is through the idea that we do this with a therapist or with somebody who's trained in this, only because the witnessing is part of it. So the other person witnessing your experience is part of the experience. But if somebody wanted to do something on their own, something really simple, which is essentially the crux of somatic experiencing, is what they call tracking. So tracking is to notice what's coming up in our bodies when we're activated, or even when we're not activated. Just sort of like notice what's coming up, give whatever is give a sort of name to the sensation. So I'll give an example. Let's say I have somebody in my life say something to me that's like unpleasant. So we sort of take a breath, sort of bring that up in our mind, and then see what happens in our body. And then let's say I feel something in my stomach that's a tightness. I would sort of notice the tightness, give it a color, notice its boundary, see if it has a shape, if it has edges, see if it's deep or shallow. And then what you do is you give your attention to the sensation. So you leave the content out of it. So how you feel about that person, what they said, what you're going to say to them tomorrow, is really irrelevant, because you stay with the body sensations. You watch the body sensations almost like you're watching a movie, and you're going to notice, does it increase? Does it decrease? Does it stay the same? Does it change to something else? And you watch what happens next. And the body, is so amazing that it is, if we give it attention. I always like to tell my clients, like, attention is medicine. Like, the pharmaceutical company does not want you to know that, but attention is medicine. And so if you use your attention and you pay attention to the sensations, it will change. And then you're going to see what happens. Like, maybe that black knot in your stomach starts to soften, and maybe now the sensation is going up towards your chest. And so now you're going to track the sensation through your body, just like we would track a story, like if somebody was telling a verbal story. So we're tracking the energy and the sensation. Oh, now I have some, bubbly feeling up my, esophagus or whatever. And then we're going to watch that. Oh, okay. Wow. Now it's going up to my throat. Now it feels kind of like a white light, and it's, in my throat, but it doesn't go any farther. And then we're going to keep the attention on it, and we're going to keep following it. And what we're doing is we're essentially letting our physiological processes complete. So there's a completion that happens rather than saying, oh God, I'm so mad at that person, and then we just stay there. There's a stuckness, right? It's like, we kind of talk about in DNRS, like we get stuck in a rut, like we're in the rut. It's like, rather than getting stuck, we're going to watch the sensations. It's almost like we're watching our nervous system do what it naturally does without us coming in and tamping it down. So we're going to watch all that sensation move until it feels gone. And sometimes that can take a little while. Sometimes that could take 2 minutes. And the attention is the medicine. So that's a cool thing people could do on their own for sure.
I love it. I actually regularly do a somatic tracking meditation that is on YouTube.
Oh.
But I didn't, well, it's probably my own fault. It's a part 2 where he guides you through it. And there was a part 1 that explains it all. And I never watched part 1.
I'm sure you're getting the benefit.
So that might be why some of what you just said is very new to me, because I've never attached it with an experience the way you just described, like, oh, I'm, something is making me feel sad right now, or something's making me feel angry, and then going into the sensation. Rather, I usually use it when I actually feel an intense sensation in my body, like say anxiety. If I feel that energy buzzing through my body, that's usually when I go lay down and do the tracking, because I find as I do it that those sensations lessen, right? They just calm down.
Sure, yeah.
But I love what I just learned with you, to use it as a tool in a moment of where there might be a heightened thought or emotion or feeling or what have you, and bringing it together.
Well, yeah, because, it's funny. It seems intimidating to a lot of people to go into their body for many reasons, right? Like trauma, like hopping out of our bodies, and social stuff, whatever. But it's actually a lot simpler to do that than to stay in our head, right? It's like if we go into our body, there's less noise, there's less trying to figure things out, there's less, justifying or whatever we're going to do. It's, I have an energy worker that I work with, and he, or that I go to. And he always says to me, stay with the sensation. And he always says, trust it, and I love when he says that, because it's like, trust the sensation. Like, you don't need to trust the thoughts. Like thinking is, really overrated. It's like, but we rely on it all the time. So this is like a way to say, oh, I'm going to get away from all that, that figuring out part and that analyzer part and that intellectual part. And I'm going to go in and just be with the sensations that don't lie, that don't, try to code themselves and all that. So I think of it as a way to like, almost like, get in touch with our spirit, because that's where there's, different kind of wisdom rather than like that, mental junk sometimes.
Totally. Yeah, I get it. And I do love attention is medicine. Something you mentioned is, okay, so you're saying attention is medicine, but earlier you actually brought up DNRS, or brain retraining. Yeah. And so I'm curious your thought on how these relate, connect, or support each other, because traditionally in the brain retraining community, we're actually taught to not give attention to the sensations in the body and to distract ourselves. So what are in your personal experience, because you did do a brain retraining program as well, how did you balance those two?
Okay, this is the question. This is the $1 million question that you should see my face. I'm like, it's like a smile and like I still have question marks around this type of thing. So I'm trying to be with all of this all the time in order to keep making sense of what I just said. But for my personal experience, what I've noticed is that with limbic impairment, at least with my situation, some of the limbic impairment was due to looping that was, obviously on overdrive. And so we don't want to give our attention to the overdrive, because then we're feeding it, like, what, DNRS talks about. But there are things underneath that, like, sort of once we clear like the top couple layers of that limbic overdrive, we can get under and then start doing inner work. So I don't think that doing somatic tracking or even doing some of the internal family systems is necessarily like a first step in doing brain retraining. Like, I don't think it's an introductory step if you're just at the beginning of your journey. I think there needs to be enough capacity in the system to hold what you're going to discover or witness or be with. So like the first step of brain retraining is just, this is what I've noticed. I'm also I'm coaching some of my clients who are doing DNRS, and with my own stuff and just, friends. That first layer is just that training on calm resourcing, just resourcing. But at some point, once we are resourced enough and we have enough capacity, we can give attention on a deeper level to some of the things that are calling for our attention. I have sort of noticed, and I don't know what you've noticed, but there are different parts. Some sort of require attention, because if I don't give them attention, they will keep yelling at me. And some parts are better dealt with me sort of showing them a new way. So like, for example, I used to have a pop that told me I couldn't go eat in a restaurant, and it had all these ideas of what was going to happen if I did that. And so what I would do is say like, oh no, like this, like we do in brain retraining, like, oh, restaurants are, amazing, especially when, we really love the food there, and this is sort of like our kind of place. And, and I'm showing that part essentially a new way. Like, hey, look, I know you thought this, but this, and we do that through visualization or whatever. And then there's sort of another thing where, maybe you might have another thing looping, and it's not about distracting anymore. It's about listening to that part. And we can get into this in a minute, but like going in a little deeper, being with the sensations, being with what the part is trying to tell you, and healing it that way. But I don't think that's the way to do it initially at all.
Yeah, so good. I love how you just explained all that and everything you said. And in my personal experience, I do feel the same way. I can really relate to everything you did just say. And what's really interesting, I've noticed from my own experience, and then also many other people's experiences through the forums, is I think we almost get to a place in our brain training, like in our journey, where we almost need to now address the somatics, because it's almost like once I peeled back enough layers and got to this deeper surface, it's like suddenly I actually I could feel and sense things in my body differently than I had before. And maybe that was because at one point it was just so limbic and so stuck in the mental chatter that I didn't even sense or feel, and so now I notice that I feel everything so much deeper, but not in a bad way, like in a really good way, because it allows me to bring attention to it.
Right. And, something that kind of links to that with, I talk about this with a DNRS friend a lot, is sort of some people on the journey have done a lot of work through psychotherapy or through different modalities, and then they go and do the brain retraining. And then some people do the brain retraining first, and then that leads them into other modalities to go deeper. In my situation, I was doing so many things, like uncovering things about myself and going deeper. But my limbic system was completely impaired the whole time. So when I did DNRS, it was as if I was providing myself with the resourcing and the calm that I really needed the whole time I was doing all that other work that nobody really knew. I just needed to be doused in like, blissful like clouds and oceans, but all I was doing was digging deeper and deeper and going more nuanced and more sort of heady, or figuring out things about my trauma and all this stuff. And it was all beautiful, and it caught up with me, now that I've done DNRS for, I think it's been 18 months now. But I definitely needed the resourcing, and it was left out. So it's interesting to see, like, to think about like what people's journeys are, like which one did you really do first? And I don't think one's better. It happened the way it was going to happen. It was sort of, outlined for me this way. But I really needed the resourcing, and that's where the brain retraining really saved my life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like also, I see this happen where many people who end up finding themselves in a brain retraining program, they tried all the physical things. They went to all the doctors, regular Western functional medicine, all the things. And what I think is we sometimes come into the brain retraining with a really skewed perception, like really anti all of that, because all of it made me worse and none of it was better for me. And I guess I take it all with a grain of salt, because like you just said, it's all about maybe because they were so limbic, none of that stuff could help them. But now that you calm that limbic system down, some of these other tools could be really supportive. Not that you would need them or, need to rely on them, but they could be more supportive than maybe they were in the other order.
Yeah. And I also think, I don't know what you think about this, but I think there's a difference between wanting to heal your physical symptoms and more mental, emotional symptoms, and being a person that wants to keep evolving, heal all your trauma, sort of become more and more conscious. Like there's a real difference. Like I do think somebody could go and do a brain retraining program and have all of their physical symptoms gone, and they're golden, like forever. I think just as far as I go, and I think a lot of people like in the community is like, for me, it's like, oh, this is my life purpose, is to keep unfolding, keep evolving, keep go, like this is till the end of time. It's sort of that personal transformation, personal evolution, rather than kind of like just about healing some symptoms, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Like yes, there's some people who are like, all right, symptoms gone, I'm good.
Yes.
And then there's the other half of the people who are like, okay, this is awesome. What else can I create? What else can I manifest? What else is possible? What is my actual potential? And you just want to keep exploring and growing and yeah, so that's where you find so many people that whatever the outlet was that they started in, they end up finding different modalities and different outlets along the way that they integrate.
Yeah. And that's why something like your podcast is so important, just to see the variations in the journeys and like, oh, wow, that person brought in this and this person only did this training, and it's all just perfect in and of itself for everybody's journey. I mean, that's how I think of it.
Yeah, same. And I tell people on here all the time is it's for inspiration and to give people ideas of tools. And then I always just say, make sure that you just connect with your own intuition and like really lean into what feels right for you, because we're not the same. We're not coming in we're coming in with such different backgrounds, histories, traumas, nervous systems, things that we've already tried. And so it's not a one size fits all,
Yeah. And, the cool thing for me is that all of these things that I've gotten trained in for my clients were part of my own evolution and journey. So it's like, I've been using this for work to like serve and give back and be, of service in the world and do what I'm I do think what I do for work and how I'm doing it is part of a calling for me. I don't think I'm in the wrong place. Like I don't think I'm supposed to go work in finance or something and I miss my calling. I'm in the right place. I'm doing the thing I'm supposed to do. So it's, for me that's also been a big part of it. Like what can I bring to my clients? Like what can I bring to the world? And then I'm also bringing it to myself. So there's been a really cool thing with that. It's like this parallel journey.
Absolutely. You're using the experiences that you've been given and, and you're kind of passing and paying that healing opportunity forward for the collective. It's like, all right, in my pain, in my experiences, I'm doing like this trial and error work. I'm experimenting, I'm figuring things out, and now let me help you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into the internal family systems, because I'm so excited to just learn more from you about this and share it with the people listening. Because like I said, we've definitely had people kind of briefly discuss this on some levels, but never under this title and to the degree that I think you're going to get to share with us today.
Yeah. I was introduced to internal family systems through another, like a therapist of mine who I was talking about doing somatic work with people and how I was kind of floundering a little bit. And she was like, do you know about internal family systems? I think that would be a nice complement to what you're doing. So I went home and I did a YouTube. Thank God for YouTube. I feel like without it, I wouldn't have been exposed to a couple things. But I did an internal family systems meditation one night and I was like, holy crap. How did I not know? Like everything started to just blow open from this like 15-minute meditation. I was like, oh my God, like this needs to be what I do next. So I immediately just signed up for a training and I started the training. So internal family systems is based on the idea, and I know, like you said, other people have talked about it, that, parts work and the idea that we have multiple parts of ourself is not new, right? It's like Freud was like, we have the id, ego, and superego. Like, parts work is not new, but internal family systems was founded by this guy named Richard Schwartz, I think in the early 90s. And he was working with individuals who had, mostly women who had eating disorders. And he was noticing as they were talking, like, oh, there's one part that wants to, binge. And then there's another part that wants to restrict or whatever it is. Like there's a part that thinks I'm this. And he was hearing them talk and he was like, oh, this is interesting. And he had been doing family systems there, like family therapy, meeting with families in his office. And he was starting to hear that some of the parts that these people were mentioning about their own internal system were mirroring the roles of family members in family therapy. So, you can picture if you had a family in a room and maybe one person in the family is a bit of the bully and the other person tries to make everything, tries to smooth everything over and the other person doesn't stop talking, whatever it is. He was noticing that these people's parts were acting in the same way, and that if he wanted to get to know these parts, like other parts would come in and try to take over, just like in family therapy where he would have to say to like the mother, like, can you please sit over there, we're trying to, your son and your husband are trying to have a conversation. So it's the same idea. So he started seeing that, and what he did that other people didn't do before him was really focus on the relationship between the parts. And that we have this, I think they've been called, this is like a kind of intense way to say it, but they call like intrapsychic entities, where it's almost like multiple personalities inside of ourselves, and there's an indefinite amount of them. So like I was saying earlier, like maybe we have one part that really wants to do brain retraining, and then we have another part that doesn't think we could do brain retraining, and then we have another part that really just wants to do nothing and stay the same. And then we have another part that thinks we'll be sick forever or whatever it is. And so the idea is that all of these parts have their own personalities, their own perspectives, their own view on the world, can be completely different. And they're all were formed at a different time in our life. Most of them have origins before we were 7, just because, that's when we're the most impressionable. Yeah, so the idea is that each part takes on different roles or different jobs in our life. And we, through a therapy process, which I can kind of explain, we work with parts, we talk to parts, we learn what parts are doing in our system. Why are they doing this job? Most of the time it's to protect us. So we learn about their protective functions. We learn about what's at stake. What do they think is going to happen if they don't protect us? And then we start to learn about the vulnerable parts underneath that need healing. So once we sort of listen to our protective parts, a lot of times they soften so that we can find out what's underneath that needs to be healed. So that's essentially the background and the framework for what IFS is.
Would you say, having the background also with DNRS, would you say that most of the time when we're dealing with POPs, they're all some variation of a part?
Yes, that's a very good question. Yes, for sure. POPs come from parts. Oh crap, I lost what I was going to say. I was going to, well, I'll just start talking and I'll remember. So yeah, it's almost like when we hear a POP that says, this is never going to go away or whatever it is, we can turn and say, oh, I know what I was going to say. Okay. So we can say like, why do you think that? We can say, what's making you say that? What else do you want to say about that? Essentially, POPs, let's say we have a POP that says one thing, a POP that says another thing. Like one part can be saying a lot of POPs, if that makes sense. It's not like every POP is from a different part. It's just we can have a few dominant parts. And when we have limbic impairment, we do have dominant parts, mostly ones that are afraid. So the thing I was going to say is the thing that links, I think, DNRS or any brain retraining program to parts work is this idea of blending or unblending. So when I'm walking around and I'm having POPs, if I let them take over, now I've just blended with a part. I've become the part. Whereas if I say, oh, I see you, right? If I see what you're trying to do here, or I say, I see you, and now we're going to just, go do a different thing. Or I see you, do you want to tell me something? Any way you take it, that is sort of like we're not fused anymore, right? It's like unblended or unfused. So the consciousness is the overlap. Is like this is a method of consciousness, just like brain retraining is a method of becoming conscious.
Okay. Yeah. And I do want to just make a mention for anyone who's listening, because I know not all the listeners are familiar with DNRS, which is the Dynamic Neural Retraining System, which is a brain rewiring program by Annie Hopper. The term that Ari and I keep referring to, POPs, is simply an acronym for Pathways of the Past. So, as you can look at it, how she's explaining it as parts, you can also look at it as limiting beliefs or just any kind of beliefs or thought systems that keep showing up in your life, for example, like a rumination. I just wanted to give an example for anyone who's like, what is all this POPs that they keep talking about?
Well, the difference between parts and POPs is that everything is a part. So versus everything is not a POP. So meaning, there are no bad parts. That's really important. And that's sort of a difference between some of these modalities and ways to look at our brain. There are no bad parts. I think actually Richard Schwartz, who coined IFS, he's coming out with a book in a couple months called No Bad Parts. Because the idea is that all of our parts are serving a function. And so there are some parts that are on overdrive, and that's essentially what pops are, is like parts that are on overdrive, but everything's a part. So just to give sort of a layout, there's two kinds of parts. There's protectors and there's exiles. So protectors are there's actually two kinds of protectors also. So there's managers and there's firefighters. So what I mean by that is like, you have a part that works really hard at your job. You're using a manager part. And that's great. Like we all need those parts. Like we need the part that's going to help us clean our house. Otherwise we wouldn't do it. Right. So that manager part is managing in your system and trying to make something happen for you. Then there's what they call firefighter parts. And firefighter parts are parts of us that put out the fire essentially. So if you're feeling kind of embarrassed and then you make a joke, humor in that instance is a firefighter, because essentially that part of you is trying to drown out that awkward, uncomfortable feeling. And so sometimes we need those parts because we need to just make light of something, or we need to get out of a situation that's, hairy. So we do something to sort of squash a feeling. Anything that has to do with addiction falls under the firefighter parts. Humor, addiction, you want to zone out because you had a really stressful day, so you watch TV. That's a part of you wants to zone out. That's essentially a firefighter part. But the idea is like we want to look at all of this as almost neutral, which is really hard because then we have judgmental parts. None of this is either bad or good. It's just the way that our system is trying to keep us alive, right? Essentially. So those are the two types of protectors, managers and firefighters. And then the other kinds of parts are called exiles. And those are our young parts, like our inner children. And those are our vulnerable parts that feel alone, parts that feel worthless. These are just sort of common exiles: worthlessness, feeling alone, feeling, misunderstood, feeling helpless, anything vulnerable. So that's what IFS is based on, is like those two parts, two categories of parts.
Gotcha. And doesn't the it was funny because the next question I was gonna ask you is how these relate to like the inner child, inner parent. But from what you're saying, it sounds like the exiles are kind of like the inner child, and the protector, mostly the manager, is kind of like that inner parent.
Yeah.
Which also tends to be your inner critic, which is also where the judgment usually comes from. Like, you're not doing that perfectionism, goodism, need to do more.
Mm-hmm. And some of the judging parts can also be firefighters. Cause like, if we have a exile or a young part that doesn't want to feel like a failure, because at some point in our childhood, we felt like failure. I mean, we all have, if you've gone through like the education system, there's gonna be some things that have made you feel these ways, not counting like our parents and all that. But so if we don't want to feel like a failure, maybe we might have a judge come in to say, don't go and do that creative project. Like you don't have time for that, and that would be a firefighter. It's not important to really know these terms, but just to understand the function is like, it's almost putting out the fire of feeling like a failure.
Yeah. Like the fear that that would lead to failing again or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, this is so interesting. And you were explaining these differences, and you were saying how they're not good, bad, right or wrong. They just are. And to have like a neutrality with them. And it makes me think of that indifference, and how it's so much conflict happens in our lives, in our bodies, in our minds, often when we're in resistance and almost fighting these parts, like when we're resisting like these parts of us, rather than coming from a place of love and acceptance of them and learning how to work with them. And so it seems like with the IFS that people are actually able to learn how to to work in collaboration with all these parts rather than resisting them, judging them, and fighting against them.
That's a really good point. So let's say that we're resisting. Essentially, the way we want to look at it is we have parts that are resisting. Mm-hmm. So the resistance isn't coming from us. The resistance is coming from more parts. So this could get a little meta. So when I was first learning about it, I would be at these like weekend retreats for this training, and I would be sitting there, and it would get so meta. Like it was like, no, but that's a part, and I'd be like, oh my, I feel like I was on a drug. I was like, what is happening? But as I started to understand it, I was a lot more relaxed around it. But when you first hear about it, you're like, wait, but how could it all be parts? So essentially the idea is that there is something called the self, capital S self, and that is who we are. I like to look at it in a spiritual lens, like that's our essence, that's our higher self, that's our soul, however you want to look at it. But they call it in IFS yourself, capital S. And yourself is the one that we want in charge of the system. So we don't want the resistant parts in charge. We don't want the like judges in charge. We want the self in charge of the system. And the self is categorized as sort of the us that's calm, compassionate, patient, creative. Like those are the qualities of self energy. So the idea of IFS is to separate and unblend from our parts so that we are our self energy, and then we could be self energy with parts. And does that make sense?
Totally. And I think this is why, so many people, like I've been there, just so many of us. It's funny because you always hear this saying like, oh, be true to yourself, or, you got to be authentic, or be true to yourself, or be real. And the thing is when we're not aware that we're actually made of all these different parts and limiting beliefs. And, it's like, we almost can attach to and associate as though we are these parts. And then we think we are being true to ourselves, or we think we're authentically aligned, but all we're really aligned to is these parts, not this capital S self, this spirit. And so, it's like getting back into that true nature to finally be able to distinguish what is actually not your truth, so that you can actually connect to that truth.
Yeah, and a beautiful way that people can do that, again, a lot easier and more effective with some sort of therapist or practitioner. But if, on our own, IFS is a method of subtraction. So I always give my clients this really bad example, and I guess I'll just keep using it. I don't know why I keep using it. I think it's fine because everybody understands it. And then after I say it, I'm like, why do I keep using this example? So imagine we had a shed with tools in it, like a lawnmower and a shovel and, I just bought a house, so I just had to buy a lawnmower for the first time in my life, and like a trimmer, and like all these tools that I'm not used to because I'm from Brooklyn. I'm like, what am I doing? Anyway, but now I have a leaf blower now, whatever. Let's say there's this shed with all these tools, and we want to get to the rake in the back. What we want to do is because we want to talk to a part of us. We want to talk to the part of us that thinks we're going to be sick forever. It's like a very common one, right? But every time like we try to talk to it, these other parts come in and say like, oh, don't think about that, or, whatever. So the idea in IFS is to move over the lawnmower. We're going to move over the leaf blower so that we can get to the part that we want to be with. And it's a method of subtraction. And the way that you do that is you ask the parts of you to move to the side. So it's kind of funny. Like, let's say a person, let's say I was working with a client and they have a part that really is mad at their mom, let's just say. And then I might say, okay, so there's a part that's mad at your mom. what does that part want to say? And then they might be like, oh, but I don't want to be mad at my mom, right? Another part comes in and swings in and tries to protect. And then another part comes in and says, like, I feel like if I'm mad at my mom, then I'm not going to have a good relationship with her. So then another part comes in and says that. And the idea is we want to ask those parts to move to the side so that we can be with the one that's angry at her. Because otherwise, we cannot have a clear and open conversation with the one that's angry at her, because there's all these other parts trying to protect us from our anger emotion or whatever it is. So it's really a method of subtraction, asking parts of you to step to the side. Oh, you're here now? Okay, can you step to the side? And then we could be with who's actually here in the moment.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I can really relate to that. When I took on expressive writing and journaling, I remember it was many months before I could actually address the part that was really angry with my father. And the reason being was because now we have this beautiful relationship, but I had stuff I had not dealt with from the past, right? That the exile parts that were like, hey, I need to be seen and heard over here. Like this still happened. And yeah, those parts of like, oh, but I feel bad, the guilt. Oh, I don't want to ruin things. They're so good now. So all those parts come in and they kind of block you, and they don't let that other part finally have a voice.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's giving that part the voice it needs for the experience to happen.
Yeah, so it's all about subtraction, because if we subtract everything, then we're left with self-energy. If we unblend from everything. And with brain retraining, we're trying to unblend, and you could feel when a part doesn't want to unblend from you. It will come up, every 5 seconds, you'll hear a pop, because the part is trying so hard to, almost like a barnacle, to just stick onto you. And we can ask the part, can you please unblend with me? And unblending doesn't mean getting rid of. So this is it seems like a technicality, but it's actually important. We can't really get rid of parts, but we can transform them, and they could take on different jobs, which is essentially what people are doing with brain retraining, is teaching our parts that it's safe to relax, to not do the job they're doing, and to take on a new job in our system. So we didn't get rid of the part. We just, we can unblend from it. We can talk to it. We can ask it what it needs from us. We can find out why it's working so hard. That's like one of my favorite questions to ask parts. Like, why are you working so hard? And the magic question in IFS is, what are you afraid is going to happen if you don't work this hard for me? Asking parts that. What are you afraid is going to happen? And parts will tell you, I'm afraid that, let me think of a concrete example. Like if someone has a part that is a critic, like a judging part. And then we talk to that judge and we say, what are you afraid is going to happen if you don't keep judging me? Then the parts say, oh, if I don't keep judging you, then you're going to make a fool out of yourself. And then we might say, and what's so bad about making a fool out of myself? Well, if you make a fool out of yourself, then you're going to look like an idiot. And what would be so bad about looking like an idiot? Well, if you look like an idiot, then no one's going to like you. And now all of a sudden, it's almost like we're funneling down to the exile. We're getting to like what's happening. It's like, oh, okay, so you judge me because you don't want me to do this activity. You don't want me to be creative because you don't want me to look like an idiot, because then people won't love me. And so now we know we're at an exile that feels unloved. We're at a, child part that feels unloved. And then we can go to that child part who feels unloved and help that part. But we couldn't help that part because we were so blended with the judge that we couldn't see that young part.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like a maze, like a puzzle.
Maze. It is a maze.
Wow. So when people get immersed in stuff like this kind of work, I mean, it sounds complex. Like there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of parts. There's a lot of questions, moving around. What kind of time commitment? I mean, I know it's not, we already said, not one size fits all, but in general, when do people really start getting breakthroughs through this experience?
So, just to reiterate, this is something that somebody would do with like IFS practitioner. You can't really do this on your own. You can do some parts work, simple things, little like meditations where we unblend and things like that, but we don't want to necessarily do it all on our own because we need a guide. You need a guide to say, oh, okay, well, that part's coming up now. Can you ask that to step to the side? Because otherwise you can think you're in self energy, but you're really blended with a part and you wouldn't even know because, we become unconscious essentially.
Right. Yeah, exactly like what we were saying earlier, where you think you're in your true self, but you're like, but are you? Are you still attached to some part that you're not even aware of? Because we all have blinders.
Oh, yeah. And, I'm going to get to your question in 1 second about the time, but I just want to say there are things called self-like parts. And those are parts that we think are ourself, but they're really a part. So I remember when I was in my IFS training, one of the weekends, it's very intense to be in these trainings because everybody's changing as we're learning. And it's like, it gets very intense, the unfolding of it. But I realized there was a moment, I don't know what, somebody said something to me and I realized that my humor was a part. And I didn't know it was a part. I was like, no, that's just me. I'm just funny. Like I can't explain it, but it was so ingrained in me because it's one of my oldest, coping mechanisms to be funny. My oldest adaptation, I probably believe was, 2 when I had to be extra funny to make sure things were okay. So I was like, what do you mean? And I started hysterical crying because I was like, but that's me, but that's not a part. I felt like something was being taken away from me because it felt like my identity. So there are things called self-like parts that we will be blind to, that's just how it is. So having a therapist be like, oh, I see this, do you notice that this is here? And then a lot of my clients will be like, well, that's just me. And I'll be like, actually, I think it's a part. Can you check? And then they'll feel, oh, it is a part. Okay, wow, I've had that my whole life. I thought that was me my whole life, So there's something really beautiful when you could get to self-like parts and unblend from them, because then you can really be in self-energy, But these kinds of things take time. And just to your question, this is a process of unfolding, getting to know yourself. This is a perfect process for anybody that really wants to get to know themselves, wants to get in touch with however you want to think of it, spirit, energy, and wants to evolve. And it's really unfolding over time. So the timing is really unpredictable because it depends on how tight your protectors are holding on. So if somebody is super protected around one issue, the protectors are not going to allow us to get in there to find out what the younger parts need because it doesn't feel safe enough yet. So everything happens on its own time. And that's why it's so important to work with someone that you trust and you can get to trust. I might say sometimes to my clients, does this part of you trust me as your therapist? Does that part trust me? And then they might say, it's a little skeptical of you, and this is the beauty of parts work. You can say whatever and it doesn't feel offensive to anybody because you're speaking for your part. It's different than if my client says, I don't trust you, than if they say, I have a part that doesn't trust you. Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the timing of it really depends on how, and I'm going to put it in words that maybe people are familiar with, on how defended somebody is. And how we can get parts to start to trust the therapist, sure, but more importantly, parts need to trust our self energy. Because sometimes we have parts that don't trust us.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, it really depends. The process goes kind of like talking to the protectors, talking to them about why they're protecting and finding out what's underneath. And then there's a whole beautiful healing process as to, doing some inner child work that I love, that you go in and you work with the child that feels worthless or the child that feels alone or whatever it is. And self energy is with that child becoming a new, almost like a new parent. And there's this like beautiful way that we work with the body, and there's a whole thing I don't need to get into, but so it really depends. Some parts of some people's system are loosen up quicker, and some just hold on a lot longer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So it can, so just like I had expected, the time can just really vary.
Yeah. But it depends. The more somebody sits with their parts, like anything we're learning, in any brain retraining program, the antidote to it all is compassion, right? So self-love. So that's what we're doing, is we're giving compassion to these protector parts of us, these defenses that have been working so hard for so long. And eventually, if you give those protectors enough compassion, they will soften so that we can figure out what's really going on.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, again, just battling yourself, your parts internally, beating yourself up for it over and over again or something.
It's almost like an after school special, and there's some bully, a middle school kid who's being a bully. And then, you bring him into the office and you say, you're the first, let's say some guidance counselor is the first person that says, are you okay? What's going on for you? Like, I see that you're hurting. All of a sudden, that kid is going to start softening, versus when we say, you're bad, you need to be punished. Right. And then he's going to start hardening even more and get stronger and really do his job. Right. So it's we can see it externally in people, when we give them compassion, what happens.
Right. Yeah. And there's a reason they became a bully to begin with.
Yes. And then we can find that out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's been your biggest lesson in all of this?
The biggest lesson.
Not even just in internal family systems, just the whole journey.
Yeah. So my biggest lesson, and it's been a journey, I will tell you. I can't even. You know that thing, I don't know if you experience this, where you look back, I'm not sure how old you are, but I'm going to be 40 this year. When I look back at my 18-year-old self or whatever it is, I cannot believe that was the same person. I'm like, whoa. Like, I'm sure a lot of people experience this. But it's shocking sometimes. Do you ever experience that?
Yes and no, because what's really interesting is the older I get and the more I look back, I see my soul. Like, I see that side of me, that self side that was always there, that beautiful side. Like now, since I have a higher level of self-love and acceptance and compassion, I see that all this of who I've become, she was always there. She was just hurting and masked and confused and lost. And so I see that, right? But then, yes, there's all these other things where you're like, oh my gosh, that's so like,
yeah,
that's crazy. I feel that way from just 3 years ago.
Oh, sure. Yesterday.
You're like, oh my gosh.
No, I think what you said is so beautiful. And just to link into what we're talking about, it's like you're gaining more self-energy. So you can see more of your self-energy when you look back too. Mm-hmm. Like, that's really cool. I think the biggest thing that you said was what is I learned the most? Sorry.
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter, but lesson. Yeah, your biggest lesson.
Right. My biggest lesson is that I am powerful. That's my biggest lesson. I didn't know. I mean, a lot of people, most of us don't know.
No, we have no idea.
I had no idea. I thought, I don't know. I know what I thought about myself, but just so many things that were just the opposite of powerful. I didn't know I could create things. I didn't know I could say what I wanted to. I didn't know that I could, just do whatever. Like I didn't know I could choose, right? I didn't know I could choose how to feel from minute to minute.
Yeah, it's a
I
good
didn't know
one.
that. I mean, how would I know? It's just so, and I was raised by people who were very like helpless, sort of victim, had no sense of their power, disempowered, right? So I had no idea. And when I say power, like, I think, that's like sometimes in this world, like, it's a dirty word at times, but I guess I'm talking more about personal power, like
sovereignty.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I had no idea. Totally it slipped past me. I don't know if anybody ever mentioned it, but I totally didn't pick up on it. I couldn't even sense what that meant. Like, I can choose what my life looks like. I can choose what I do every day. I can choose how I want to feel. I mean, that it was a shock.
Yeah. That's awesome. Beautiful. So what's been your greatest gift in all of it?
My greatest gift. It's a good question. Well, so now I'm doing, I do a lot of spiritual work with people, and IFS really led me there by, getting more access to my own self energy. I started to realize kind of more of my calling and what I'm supposed to be doing here in this lifetime. And I do readings using something called the Akashic Records. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a spiritual tool where I tap into a realm called the Akashic realm, and I essentially talk to people's spiritual team, and I can see a person's past lives and ancestral patterns and why they're here, somebody's purpose. And that is what I've been moving into, like, especially in the past year. I've been doing it for 5 or 6 years, but I've gotten really more focused on doing readings for people. It's different than a psychic reading. It's not really predictive necessarily. It's not like you're going to have 2 kids and one of them is going to be named John. It's not quite like that, but it's a way to like really get in touch with somebody's like soul level information, depending what people believe. This is sort of the practice. So I think my biggest gift has to do with my spirituality and realizing that, I was put in this body, in this, pretty wild, journey in a family that like did not support me on purpose. And like, I chose it, and, I'm here to do spiritual work with people. And I think of trauma healing as spiritual work. So, when I say spiritual work, I mean everything that I'm doing with folks, like trauma healing, getting to know parts, doing readings, like whatever it is. So that is like, just my biggest gift is realizing that is why I'm here. Like that is what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm doing it. And then I'm supposed to help people become conscious. That's like, so thank God, because at one point I thought I was supposed to be a teacher, and that didn't work out right.
But you are still in a different way.
In a different way.
Totally different kind of teacher. Yeah.
Not like, when I was a high school teacher, that was a bust. But so that's the gift, is just, waking up, really.
Wait, yeah. I mean, it's like, basically you said all of this stuff is spiritual work, and it is, right? Because it's all helping lead us back to the, capital S self, which is spirit. Exactly. And it's like, you had this gift already within you, and you just had to peel back the layers to allow it to express itself and be able to like leverage it in its best way.
Yeah, yeah, and I I do believe we choose our families, we choose our
Yes,
life, and
me too.
um,
Yep.
I chose something really wacky in order to get me to do all of this work. Um,
Yeah.
these are the kind of reminders I need to, like I write my, like post-it notes on my desk. Like, you chose this. This is all going in the, the exact direction that it's supposed to go.
Yeah, I remind myself that all the time. Like, you chose it. You chose your family. You chose all of it. You chose to be here in 2020. Like, you chose it for a reason.
Yeah.
So what are you
Yeah.
going to do with it? Because you were meant to be here. So what are you going to do with it? And it's so much more like empowering. It's so much more empowering to own that we chose it rather than think it was just happenstance,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, for sure. It is. It's much more empowering. And I think, just going back to what I was saying about feeling powerful, is I think a really good question for anybody trying to heal from anything is to like ask themselves, like, who or what at any point made me feel like I wasn't, like, made me feel like I didn't have power. Because that's where the work is, I think. Like,
Mm-hmm.
who told me I wasn't powerful? Like, what part of the world told me? What part of our society? What part of our, what member of my family told me that I wasn't powerful? Or, not directly, but sort of communicated that. Because I think that's where we go to heal trauma, wherever those places are, to just reclaim some of that. And then every time we do the work, we take a little piece back, a little piece back, a little piece back, and then we can do anything we want. So
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. So you were talking about how you're here to help people gain consciousness.
Hmm.
What's your mission in life? What's the actual, like, is and maybe there isn't one, but do you have this like kind of bold message that you're here to spread to the world?
Wow, I never thought of that. I don't think I have one message. I do think, just if I had, like, my philosophy almost really rests on the idea that what we need is already inside of us. Like, I think that's really, if I had to have like a mission, that would be what it is. Like, you don't, like, you think it's outside of you. Everyone thinks it's outside of them. Um, we think we could buy it. We think somebody else can teach it to us. And it's 0% true. Like, you already have it inside. Like, we come with it, so we come with what we need. And that's really like what I lean into, especially when I work with clients. It's like I'm leaning into what's already in there, like what's already working. Like, what, it's almost like I try almost to have a laser beam focus to, sort of blast past all of this stuff that was created by their human experience and just go right into, who they really are. And it's like a special lens that I've learned to use when I'm with clients. So I think that's really it, is like, it's already in there, you have it, and you can access it. Yeah.
100%. Hey, you're sharing this message in the right place, given the name of my podcast.
Yeah.
Our power is
Right.
within.
I totally forgot. Right.
Yeah. It is already
Yeah.
within us. It is within us. So, yeah, the message aligns, but we need so many people to spread that message so far and so wide.
I know. Yeah. Sometimes I remind myself, like, I was told a lie. Like, we were all told a lie. We were told a lie that, we needed somebody else to tell us what to do. We need somebody else to make a decision for us. We need somebody else to tell us what our own, like, intuition can tell us in a minute. Um, so, I really try to help my clients and myself, just keep remembering that. Like, oh, you already know. You already know the truth. You already know what you need to do. You already know. And that's really powerful, I think,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just facilitating for somebody to go within and find that truth. You're not like, a doctor that's telling them what they should be doing or how they're going to do it. It's just, you're just facilitating it. You're creating a space that allows them to tap into their own self.
Yeah, that's been really important to me throughout my journey, because I actually just changed like my title, or what I'm calling myself, which felt funny at first, but I was like, it's time. And I use the term psycho spiritual guide, because when I put therapist or psychotherapist and people come to me, there's a real idea that I'm this expert and I have to tell them what to do. Um, and they don't know, like it's almost like they're just putting me as part of the patriarchy. It's like, oh, another person that's going to tell me what to do. And that is really not conducive to healing. So I decided to change my title so that it would be like, oh, wow, I'm just over here sort of like being the rudder on the boat, and you already know where to go, but then there's like a wind that comes. So I'm like, no, this way, but that's really, really important to me, I think. And it's important with my own parts too, to like, inside of ourselves, to not let our parts think we're trying to tell them what to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Good stuff. Where can people connect with you?
So I have, my website is erigaeta.com. It's ERIGAETA. It's a lot of vowels. And you can see some stuff about the spiritual readings I'm doing, and also therapy. I also do EMDR, which we didn't talk about, but that's for trauma as well, which I'm sure people know about. And there's a contact form on there, and people can reach out. And I'd love to hear, anybody's interest or comments, or if anybody has just questions about IFS or how to get a good IFS therapist or anything like that, you can feel free to, contact me.
Awesome. Are you on social media at all?
I'm not.
Good for you.
Yeah, I know. Maybe that's a detriment, but it hasn't, to like professionally, but it's actually served me really well.
Good for you.
Yeah. I couldn't do it. It was like, I wasn't vibrating at the same level, and then I was feeling bad every day. I'm sure people can relate to this. So
it's an energy sucker.
It is.
I know, because I get sucked in sometimes.
Yeah, I know. I just deleted it all. I was like, that's it. And then
Good for you.
I felt free. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So we will definitely drop the website link in the show notes for people to contact you and connect with you that way. I wanted to ask one other question. You mentioned the first time you heard of IFS, you actually went home and you found a meditation on YouTube. Do you have one that you would recommend that I could put a link in the show notes for people who wanted to experience one?
Yeah, I can. There's so offhand, I'm trying to think what I might do. So if people know about Insight Timer, the app, Insight Timer has all of the free meditations, talks, whatever. Richard Schwartz, who coined IFS, he has some IFS meditations on there. And I think those are great because he's the one that came up with the sort of formula to how it all works. He has a very sort of dry, like, I don't know if dry is the right word. He's just super laid back and super calm. And they've talked about how IFS is kind of a lazy person's therapy because you're really just saying like, and what does that part think? And what does that part think? Like, cause you're not the expert. Like you don't have to say anything to clients necessarily. Like you have to just listen to their parts and have them form a relationship. So he has this really kind of special, like laid back way, and then he's just like doing something magical. It's really cool. So on Insight Timer, people can find his, if you look up like Richard Schwartz, he has some, and there's another guy on YouTube that I think his name is Derek. Here, I'll find it. Derek Scott, and he's like he has so many YouTube videos about IFS. And yeah, I mean, people can find them everywhere. I liked any ones that are from Richard Schwartz, or sometimes he goes by Dick Schwartz, because, you know, sometimes those are just a little more like legitimate, if that's the right word.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. And then if people want to understand their parts a little bit better, they can always watch the good old classic the cartoon movie?
Oh, Inside Out.
Inside Out. Animated, not cartoon movie. It's an animated film, Inside Out, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's so good. And like the cool thing about that movie is that they get a little specific. Like they show how parts of us hold memories. And so that, you know, how they have those little islands with like the fun part and like whatever with her memories. That's really, it's really cool. It's like a simplified, a little less meta version.
Yeah. It's a good starting point.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share today that I didn't get to ask you?
No, I don't think so, but I really appreciate everything you're doing for the brain retraining community. And, I know like I don't know exactly what you feel like your purpose and calling is, but like you're giving back so much. So I just appreciate it. Really, I never talk about myself because I'm always talking with clients. So I just feel really honored. So, yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, thank you. And it was a pleasure having you.
Oh, cool.
That is a wrap. How are you feeling after that? Are you able to wrap your head around it all? As you were listening, were you able to almost instantly identify certain parts that you have within you? If you do need help navigating this internal world of your parts and you feel really drawn to this message, you can find links to connect with Ari in the show notes. Don't forget to practice loving yourself this week through gifts and see how it feels. Just notice. And until next time, make this week great.